Hello everybody, thanks for joining me. This video is going to cover poetic devices, and it's going to serve as a quick summary to help guide you through all of the different terms that we discussed in class. Over the course of our time together, we are going to introduce and review the poetic devices present in the poems that we read and the songs that we listen to. Throughout this video, we will cover alliteration, assonance, enjambment, hyperbole, idiom, imagery, metaphor, onomatopoeia, personification, repetition, rhyme, and last but not least, simile. First on our list is alliteration, which is the repetition of an initial consonant sound. This essentially means that it is the same consonant sound repeated over and over again at the beginning of words. So when we say repetition of an initial consonant sound, we want to make sure that we know what a consonant is in the first place. These letters right here, these are going to be our vowels. So if it's one of these letters being repeated, that is not going to be alliteration because those are vowels, and we're going to use another term for that. Moving forward with our examples here, because I want this video to be relatively quick for all of you, let's look at the green grass grew in the graveyard. Now, I said before it's the repetition of the initial consonant sounds. There's a lot of the same thing going on with a few of these words. That's going to be the green grass grew in the graveyard. So not only is it just the g, it's the grr sound, the green grass grew. So we didn't say repetition of the initial consonant letter, which could be G, it could be R. We're saying it's the repetition of the initial consonant sound. Next, we've got what a tale of terror now their turbulency tells. Did not circle that T because it didn't give the same sound as the other words in there, which were tale, terror, turbulent, tells. There, it doesn't really match what we were looking for. He keeps the kitchen calm and clean. Something neat that's going on with this one. We go from the k sound coming out with these letter K's here and here, but then we switch over to calm spelled with a C and clean spelled with a C. So it once again does not have to be the consonant letter. It's the consonant sound. And throwing things back to an earlier example that we had, Paul's such a poor poltergeist, partially plagues the playpen. There's a lot of them here. Paul, such a poor poltergeist, partially plagues the playpen. Just for clarification's sake, I want to walk us through some non-examples. The cyclist carries chocolate. As we were looking at with the previous examples, we were saying that it isn't always the letter because, yeah, the same consonant's coming up over and over again. It's the same letter C, but they are all voiced very differently, and the sounds are not the same. So you can't spot alliteration through a mere read-through of a poem or a song or a text if you don't completely understand how the word is pronounced in the first place. So if I didn't know how these C's were voiced, I would assume that it would probably be alliteration because it's the repetition of the same consonant. However, as we've talked about, it is not the same consonant sound. So the cyclist carries chocolate, those don't work. It's not alliteration. Our next one, we're not looking at any sort of different voicing of letters at the initial spot. The stars blow winds and clouds. So this was actually a pitfall that I had made previously. So winds, clouds, stars. Yeah, it's the same consonant sound. We got that, but we want to make sure it is the initial consonant sound. So it needs to come at the beginning of the word in order for it to be a valid case of alliteration. And with our last non-example here, we have the same consonant sound coming up, or consonant letter coming up through tough tsunami waters. It's a T every single time, but that doesn't mean that the T is pronounced the same way throughout all these words. Through tough tsunami. Same letter, different pronunciations. It's not alliteration. Somewhat similar to alliteration, we have assonance, which is going to be the repetition of vowel sounds, which are usually internal. Now, we talked about consonants with the last one, and I wrote out a set of letters for you and then immediately crossed them off. This is going to be a case in which we are interested in those previous letters. That's going to be A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. Something interesting to note with this definition here, we said that it's usually internal. This sound is going to be something that usually ends up internalized within the words. So to compare with alliteration, where it must be the initial sound, assonance is generally, most of the time, going to appear in the middle of these words rather than at the front or at the end, but it doesn't always have to be that way. So for our first example, he saw the cost and hauled off. He saw the cost and hauled off. This is another one where maybe just reading it in your head may not do it justice because you won't catch these pronunciation patterns if it's just in your head, if you don't know the true pronunciation of the word. So this is another reason why it helps to read things out loud. Next, we've got the snow in the rose garden groaned. The snow in the rose garden groaned. Once again, as we've seen even just so far, a lot of these are internalized. They're not ending up at the very beginning of the word. Not all of them are at the very end. Most of them appear in the middle of letters. Next, the engineer tried to steer out of fear of veering near the deer. So the engineer tried to steer out of fear of veering near the deer. The spelling, all you need to do is come up with pronunciation that is repeated. So as we see here, we have E-E, E-E, E-A, E-E, E-A, E-A, and E-E. Regardless of how they're spelled, they are all sound the same. And last for our examples, for the rare and radiant maiden who the angels named Lenore. For the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore. So that's the repetitive A sound. And of course, we've got our non-examples. Through thorough thought, English isn't too tough, though. I like using this sentence as an example just because it shows how wacky English can be sometimes. A lot of these words, they look the exact same. To a non-native English speaker, someone just picking up English for the first time, they'd probably think maybe they are the same word. But as we know, as I've just read, through thorough thought, English isn't too tough, though. None of those words, carry a repetitive vowel sound that's matching. For our first word, this is through, then we have thorough. So through, thorough, and this is ought. English isn't too off, oh. So all of them end up doing something a little different, and they're so different that we can't really count those as assonance at all, even though they look like it would. And then we got Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. This isn't assonance. However, this is a great example of something called alliteration. Moving away from just looking at letters and sounds, we've got enjambment, which is moving from one line to another without any sort of pause or punctuation. The uses of this poetic device would generally be for flowing of thought from one line to the next, allowing ideas to run from one line to another line, and it all helps lead itself towards building rhythm and faster pacing. So let's look at this example, Endymion by John Keats. And we're going to start out by reading, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. And we've got this colon here. So considering how we move from one line to another without any punctuation or pause, this is not an example of enjambment. But its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness, but still will keep a bower quiet for us, and a sleep full of sweet dreams and health and quiet breathing. Moving on, we've got hyperbole, which, simple enough, it's just an extreme exaggeration. It's a way of explaining a feeling, some sort of emotion, without being so cut and dry about it. So this is generally for dramatic effect. With our examples, when I say that I am sick with love, I'm sick with it, I'm essentially just telling you I'm really in love, but it's not as powerful as me on my knees yelling into the rain, I am sick with love. You know, it's less dramatic. When we're writing English, we're writing these texts, we're reading these poems by some pretty passionate authors. It just doesn't do enough to just say I'm very in love. It works a lot better when I am sick with love, or I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. I must be pretty hungry, but I'm not just gonna say I'm super hungry today. No, by saying I'm so hungry I could eat a horse, I'm being overly dramatic, simply for effect, to underline and emphasize exactly how hungry I am. So hungry that I could eat this extremely heavy, huge beast. Then we've got, wow, this is fluffy. It's so fluffy, I'm gonna die. You know, one of those is a lot more dramatic than the other one is. And I would argue that it's so fluffy, I'm gonna die. All right, everyone, we've reached just about the halfway point here, so thanks for sticking with me. Idiom, that is an expression generally defined by culture and or language. So we're gonna look why I added that specific tag in there. But essentially, it's some sort of expression. It's a figure of speech. So here are our English examples up here. That will cost you an arm and a leg. If I'm talking about, perfect example, school. When you go to an institution of higher learning, try and further your education beyond high school, generally there is some sort of tuition cost for attending a degree-granting institution like a college. A lot of students, they'll apply for scholarships. Why would they apply for scholarships? Because that tuition will cost you an arm and a leg. Now, you don't see a lot of these college graduates walking out with less limbs than how many they entered. So what we're just trying to say there is that it's really expensive. It's just a figure of speech, just like hyperbole. We're being dramatic with this one, but just a figure of speech, and it doesn't translate that well into other languages. So this is something that is unique to English, as most idioms generally are unique to their own language. Next, I'm feeling a bit under the weather. All of us are always a bit under the weather. We don't operate above clouds. Life takes place on the surface of the earth. Weather takes place above the surface. So all of us are under the weather, but when I say I'm feeling under the weather, I'm saying that I am sick. I'm saying I don't really feel 100%, but it's just an alternative way for me to say that without just flat out saying I'm feeling kind of sick. Last, it's raining cats and dogs. It doesn't rain animals. It just is saying that there is a lot of rain coming down from the sky, so much so it resembles the size of a small pet. Now, I didn't want to give you non-examples just because, if an idiom is an expression, a non-example would be something that's a non-expression, which is most speech. But I do want to give you some global examples to show that idioms, they don't translate the same from language to language, and an idiom in English will not really make sense in Spanish, it won't make sense in Portuguese, it won't make sense in German, and so on. So as I've said in other videos, Spanish will be the fallback that I have for a lot of our language examples, just because it's the only language besides English that I have extensively studied. So with our first example, we've got no hay que buscarle cinco patas al gato, which in Spanish means no need to look for 5 paws on a cat. Now, I've never heard any English speaker say something like that. I think it means something along the lines of there's no need to look for problems when there aren't problems, but it just makes more sense within the home language than it does when you translate it to another one, because a lot of meaning is lost. Now, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this Polish idiom, but what this says right here, and for all of my viewers watching that speak Polish, hopefully you can pick up on this idiom a lot more than I was able to. But it translates to think of blue almonds. And essentially that's just saying that you're daydreaming. You're thinking of blue almonds. You've caught yourself just thinking about stuff that doesn't exist. Lastly, jumping back to English, on the Wallaby track. Now that is something that is spoken in English. However, we cannot forget that English is spoken on multiple continents. Multiple countries also speak English. So in Australia, by saying you're on the Wallaby track, you're just pointing out that someone doesn't have a job. This is all unique to Australian English, and if I was walking in the street and said on the Wallaby track, I don't think many of the American English speakers will be able to pick up exactly what I'm talking about, because it's an idiom that was lost, because idioms are generally defined by culture and or language. Doesn't have to be either one. Next, we've got imagery, which is text that seeks to engage those senses, our 5 senses, which is seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, and smelling. Some examples here: words spread like leaves in a storm. That's going to try and give us that picture of leaves swirling around in a storm's wind, which when we say word spreads like leaves in a storm, we're saying that word gets around fast. One statement is going to get passed from person to person, just like these leaves get passed from street to street, yard to yard, town to town. Powerful wind. We've got the chirping crickets fill the air. Chirping crickets, that's going to engage hearing, so we can imagine the sounds of those chirping crickets. The eerie silence was shattered by her scream. Once again, we're going towards that auditory hearing sense. And then lastly, the music coursed through us, shaking our bodies as if it came within us. So I'm talking about music, but I am linking that to the sense of feeling, touching. It's feeling our bodies shake as if this music came within us. So I am furthering the description of a sound, hearing, through something that I can physically feel, which when I say it came from within us, it's not necessarily touch, but it is that sensation of touch. For metaphor and simile, I wanted to put them both on the same page just so that we can compare and contrast the two poetic devices, because these two are extremely similar and oftentimes mixed up. We've done a lot of really good work with simile in class, not so much with metaphor because we haven't done a lot of it yet, but I wanted to put them side by side for you just so that you can see exactly why some people may confuse the two, and so that you won't whenever we practice with metaphor. So, with metaphor, that is speaking of one thing in the terms of another. So both of these are going to be some sort of comparison, but they're unique in how they compare. Metaphor is a direct comparison. It is saying that this is something else. Life is a highway. Love is a battlefield. The cookies were stones. You shoot me down, but I won't fall. I am titanium. So knowing that both of these things are comparisons, with our first statement, I am comparing life to a highway. Highways, they're long, they're windy, they have other cars on there, sometimes there are detours, sometimes there's bumps in the road. I am doing this direct comparison of life and highway and describing all of the characteristics of life as though it is a highway. Love is a battlefield. I think about the different descriptions that we can use to describe the characteristics of a battlefield, and I'm linking those directly back to love. The cookies were stones. I think of a stone and I think of, that being really hard generally. So when I say that the cookies were stones, I'm most likely suggesting that they were kind of old, really hard, and probably hurt my teeth. Because if you chew on stones, it's probably not going to go so well for you. Lastly, you shoot me down, but I won't fall. I am titanium. So there, I'm simply just saying that I am titanium. I am this precious metal. I am unbreakable. It's this direct comparison, and it's generally stronger than simile. So I'll add that. They're usually on the stronger side. And then we've got simile, of course, which we've practiced a little bit. It is the comparison of two things using like or as. So either one of those in order to get our point across. And then we've got life is like a box of chocolates. My love is like a burning flame. These cookies are as hard as a rock. You lived your life like a candle in the wind. Like a candle in the wind. So the two that I think are pretty similar are the cookies were stones, the cookies are as hard as rock. I'm essentially saying the same thing there. One of them is done in a little bit more of a concise manner, which is this one. And by concise, I mean it's just cleaner, it's shorter. The cookies were stones. But the other one, I have to explicitly say these cookies are as hard as a rock. All right, so all of that work is done by me saying the cookies were stones because I'm implying that the stones are hard, and then through that suggesting that the cookies are hard too. But with simile, I have to first establish that the cookies are hard, and then I need to link that to something that is hard, which are rocks, just to prove that sort of emphasis that I'm trying to do through my comparison. Here's a fun one, onomatopoeia. Can never spell it. Always going to need to use spell check in order to get that one right. It is just a word formed through a sound. So just around the word itself, I've got boom, pow, wham, crack. Without our examples, with a click of the mouse, I was able to order my mom's birthday present. Tick-tock, time is running out. It was impossible to stay calm when I heard the buzz of a bee near me. Ugh, I hate these. I hate. Oh, this is a typo. I can't stand blue cheese. So, that is our onomatopoeia. But this is supposed to say I can't stand blue cheese. I also can't stand typos, so I'm sorry about that. With personification, we are giving human or living qualities to non-human things. What are our examples? Time grabs you by the wrist and directs you where to go. So this is time. That is our non-human object that we're talking about. And we are saying that it grabs you. So time, all it does is it passes by us indifferently. We can't control time. We can't touch time. In our dimension of existence, it's just something that happens. So time can't really physically grab us. But through personification, I can give these human qualities to time. Say that it grabs you by the wrist, directs you where to go. Opportunity was knocking on my door. So opportunity, that is our object. And the action, that living quality that is doing, it's knocking on my door. The toast jumped out of the toaster. So the toast, action that it's doing, jumped out of the toaster. Lastly, the cookies were calling my name. We've got cookies. That is our non-living, non-human action. And they were calling my name. With repetition, we're simply looking at when a word or phrase is used over and over again. With our examples, free at last, thank God Almighty we are free at last. So right here, famous quote, Martin Luther King Jr., free at last, thank God Almighty we are free at last. A horse is a horse, of course, and no one can talk to a horse, of course. That is, of course, unless the horse is a famous Mr. Ed. So there's a little bit of different kinds of repetition going on in here. So we're going to start out with horse. So a horse is a horse, of course, and no one can talk to a horse, of course. That is, of course, unless the horse is famous Mr. Ed. So a horse is repeated over and over again. But we also have a phrase. A horse is a horse, of course, and no one can talk to a horse, of course. That is, of course, unless the horse is famous Mr. Ed. So we have a combination of repeating words with horse, but we also have a repetition of phrases with of course. And then lastly, we've got rhyme, when a vowel and final sounds of two or more words is identical. Some examples. There was an old man from Peru who dreamt he was eating his shoe. He awoke in a fright in the middle of the night and found it was perfectly true. So with this, I'm going to underline all of our end rhymes, because in the poems that we'll be reading and a lot of the songs that you've listened to, the rhyme generally ends up at the very end of a line. So there was a man from Peru who dreamt he was eating his shoe. He awoke in a fright in the middle of the night, and he found it was perfectly true. So here are 3 rhymes that match: Peru, shoe, and true. However, there is another rhyme that takes place. He awoke in a fright in the middle of the night. So this is more talking about rhyme scheme. This is unique to the type of poem that our author wrote here. So we're going, this is an A, B, B, A. So all of our A's match up and our B's match up, but it doesn't necessarily mean that each consecutive line has to rhyme. And then our non-example. The engineer tried to steer out of fear of veering near the deer. That example actually came up earlier. As we know, that is not necessarily rhyme. It's the repetition of vowel sounds in a word, and that is going to be called something else. That something else is assonance. And then lastly, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore. Once again, that is not the vowel and final sounds of 2 or more words that is identical. That is the pairing of internal vowel sounds, which isn't necessarily rhyme. Once again, that is assonance. So everyone, I hope you have found some use out of this video. I do understand it's pretty long, so hopefully I've figured out how to put links in the description of the YouTube video. So if you wanted to go to the description at the bottom, I have highlighted where each segment begins so that you'll be able to just quickly jump to the point in the video that you're interested in. For example, maybe you completely understand, let's see, you know how to do alliteration, you know assonance, enjambment, hyperbole, but for whatever reason you gotta just cover idiom once again. That was the 7th slide in our presentation, so hopefully I've placed a link for you just to jump straight to that point. But like I said, I'm new to YouTube and this hasn't made it to YouTube yet, so I'm still working with the formatting of how these videos go. I do appreciate your patience though with me exploring how to give these lessons to you. I appreciate any feedback that you guys can offer, and I just really do appreciate you just watching it in general. So a lot of appreciation going around. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and as always, if you have any questions, just ask me during class.